episode 70 of our weekly CRICKETher podcast. We're at home today because the England v India series wrapped up at Chelmsford on Wednesday, and England ended up winning the series 10-6 on points. So we're going to talk a little bit about the series overall. Have you got any overall reflections on the series, Sid, to start with?
Yeah, I think England will be well pleased with their performances. I think that India did provide a reasonable test, perhaps a better test than New Zealand will come September. There was some good fight, there was some good games. England certainly didn't have it all their own way, but at the end of the day, I think that England did kind of stamp their authority on it a little bit and showed that they're really, whatever the ICC rankings say, there shouldn't really be any doubt as to who the second best team in the world are. I think that there's still no doubt of who the best team in the world are. Hi, Australia. But I think that England have shown that they've bested India. And I think that England will be also pleased with a lot of their individual performances. So they've got kind of two top sixes now that they've kind of settled on, which they're going to take forward for the next year into the World Cup and the Commonwealth Games. And I think they'll be pretty happy with the performances there. Everyone in the kind of 7 top 6 players got a score except for Winfield Hill and Amy Jones. But Lauren Winfield Hill got a couple of 30s and a 40, so didn't disgrace herself at all. Amy Jones also got a very nice 40-odd in the first T20 at Northampton. She looked in great touch. So I think that England will look at their batting lineup and go, yeah, we've really got something here that's going to take forward. And Heather Knight's argument that she was putting in place a team for those series, those big things next year, the World Cup and the Commonwealth Games, looks to be on pretty solid ground from a batting perspective. So that's good.
And with Sofia Dunkley coming in, that was also nice, wasn't it, to see her coming in and doing so well and really cementing her place. And in our last video, we did talk a bit about Danny Wyatt's place being slightly at risk, didn't we? And that she was kind of one of the players, or probably the only batter that there was a bit of a question mark over. But you actually wrote your piece about her performance at Chelmsford on Wednesday. Really kind of showed that why Heather Knight has retained such faith in her as a T20 player. Yeah,
she looked great, didn't she? We've seen her play several times this season for the Vipers and for England, and it was definitely her best performance of the season. She looked in great touch. She was actually hitting the ball and it was coming out the middle of the bat, and soaring to the boundary. It was a great performance. So England will be well pleased with their batting. I think if they're honest with themselves, and I do think they will be honest with themselves in private, even though they wouldn't say this in public, they'll probably be a little less pleased with the bowling. I think that their main issue, kind of at the moment with the bowling, is that they've identified their key strike bowler and they've identified their key containing bowler. Unfortunately, they're both Sophie Eccleston, and she's not allowed to bowl in both those capacities in one match. So she's still only allowed 4 overs in a T20.
It's a shame, really. They should change the rules on that.
So, there were some other good bowling performances. I think they'll be very happy with Nat Siver. She remains, a really good, useful option for England to have as an all-rounder. But I think that they need to make sure that they don't put too much pressure on her to see her as a strike bowler. What she is a bowler to come in and perform in the middle overs and things like that. And she did well there. She had a particularly good T20 series. Catherine Brunt's numbers were okay, but a couple of other bowlers' numbers were a lot less okay. And England should perhaps be a little bit worried about those. And I think that going forwards, that's where they're going to need to kind of consider what other options are available to them, because I think that's where the gap is going to be between England and Australia. And ultimately, we've said that England are the second best T20 team in the world, second best ODI team in the world. They're the best team that aren't Australia, but if they want to be the best team, then maybe that's where they would need to make some changes.
Yeah, they want Commonwealth gold, they don't want Commonwealth silver.
Exactly, yes. So, but overall, I think that a lot of positives come out of the series for England, so that's good. Another player that I think that we need to talk about from a perspective of bowling, in that she's played as a bowler, is Maddie Villius. Not because I think that Maddie Villius played badly, I don't think she did, but I think the issue with Maddie Villius is that England don't really know what she's for. She's playing in these T20 games, but she's not getting much of a chance to bowl. She only bowled a handful of overs in the T20s. She didn't get much chance to bat. She's been batted down the order. What's she there for? She's a gun fielder, definitely. I've been heard to say that she's one of the best fielders, if not the best fielder in the world, and she is very good. But it sort of feels like England are confused about what she's doing in the team. They don't really trust her to bowl a lot of overs. They don't trust her batting higher up, so that she's batting below Catherine Brunt, and it's difficult to know what her role actually is. Is there somebody else, Raf, that could come into the team and actually have a defined role within the side?
Well, I think that England should perhaps be thinking very carefully about what they think Maddie Villiers' role going forward is. I do think that, for example, somebody like Bryony Smith could have a really important role to play in the T20 side. For example, batting at 7, she hits it really hard. She could do that role, kind of coming in and just hitting 30 or 15 balls. That's what she does. We've seen her do it for Stars a few times this season. And the other thing that she does then offer is a few overs of off spin potentially, because she bowls regularly for Stars as well. She's probably not as good a bowler as Maddie Villiers, is that maybe fair to say? But if England want somebody who can kind of do both of those roles, then I think that she might be worth looking at, and she certainly hits the ball very, very hard, possibly harder than anyone else in England. Is that fair to say? So I think that could be something worth considering, especially because, as you say, they do seem a little bit confused about Maddie Villiers' role.
I think there's something else with Bryony Smith as well that could be really interesting, is to actually look at the different roles that she could play if England are batting first or second. So I think that if England are batting first, she can come in late down the order and actually be the person that smashes those 30 or 15 balls at the end of it. But if England are batting second, maybe you put her in up top and let them get a bit of a head start with her 30 or 15 balls, because that's probably what you're going to get from her. And so I think there's potentially something England could look at there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think the other thing is you've touched on the role of Nat Siver with the ball there. I think the fact that she now does seem to be really kind of coming into her own a bit more as a T20 bowler, and is able to offer you 4 really good overs of seam, that gives England a little bit more flexibility to actually have a little bit of an extra kind of batter who bowls option rather than a bowler who bats, which is perhaps more what we've seen them go with at the moment. So I think that Siver bowling 4 overs could offer you a bit more flexibility. But I did also want to mention Tash Farrant here when we're talking about England's kind of problems with their bowlers. I think that she hasn't been treated very well over the last few weeks. She's been in this kind of semi-England bubble for the entire multi-format series. So from the very start of them going to Bristol for the test, and she's been in the team bubble and she hasn't played a single match in the series. And that's very difficult, actually, especially in COVID times when they really are quite restricted in what they can do between games. I think that that's actually really disappointing. And the irony about the whole situation is that she was called up to the England, back into the England squad over the winter, and went to New Zealand on the back of really successful performances in the Rachel Hayhoe-Flint Trophy last season. So that's brilliant, but because she's been in the bubble for such a long period and literally all she's been doing is carrying the drinks, she hasn't been able to captain Stars very often. She hasn't been able to play very many matches for them, and she's not going to be able to make that impact on the domestic season that she made last year. And if I was Tash Farrant right now, I'd be feeling actually a bit upset and a bit frustrated by the whole situation, because I would prefer to have been out there captaining Stars than sitting on the sidelines for England and in a hotel room between games, and basically almost being used as a net bowler for that entire period. If they had really known that they weren't planning to use her, then perhaps you have her in the squad for one or two of the components of the series, and then let her go for the other and actually play some cricket for stars. So I think that's really disappointing, and I really don't understand why they didn't give her a game or two in the series. I know it came down to the wire, but we saw, as you say, kind of somebody like Maddie Villius playing and not really bowling very many overs. Well, would having Tash Farrant in the side really have made a huge difference in, instead of Villiers or instead of Glenn in one of the T20s? I just don't think it would have. So I think that's really disappointing for her, and I'm not particularly keen on the way that England have managed that situation.
Okay, so now what about the actual multi-format series itself, Raf? Because this is the first time that we've seen a full kind of multi-format series across Test, ODIs and T20s, apart from the Women's Ashes, where it obviously has been very successful. How do you think England v India went more generally as a multi-format series?
I think it went really well generally. I think from a journalist perspective and from the kind of perspective of the media coverage, one of the big strengths of these multi-format series are that the narratives carry across between the games. And I know that they did try a similar thing in men's cricket a few years ago, and it was seen generally to have been a bit of a flop and not particularly successful, and people weren't very keen on that. That's quite different because the players end up being very different in men's cricket between the Tests and the ODIs and the T20s, whereas in women's cricket we generally see at the moment that teams tend to be broadly similar, not identical obviously. There'll be the odd player that comes in and out, etc. And we saw that with both England and India, but there were those series long battles between, for example, Catherine Brunt and Shafali Verma. People saw that in the Test for the first time, and it was a very interesting kind of seesaw battle, and it carried on the whole time. And that was really kind of exciting and interesting, and people talking about that. And so having those narratives from a perspective of media coverage and fan interest is brilliant. I also think it gives women's cricket a little bit of a point of difference with the men's game, and I think that that's always a good thing, because I don't think that we should be having to follow what the men do all the time. And I think in this instance, it's something that can work really brilliantly for us, for our game, and just let the men get on with whatever they want to be doing over there, and that's fine. So overall, yeah, brilliant. And of course, obviously, there's that other component about the fact that we got to see England v India playing a Test, and it wasn't just a kind of one-off slightly meaningless occasion, as we saw in 2014 at Wormsley, the last time England and India met in a Test before Bristol. It actually felt like it had meaning and a kind of broader, importance generally. And so hopefully, the next time England and India meet each other, that means that there will be a Test. Fingers crossed. So, yeah, overall, I think it's worked really well. What do you think, Sid?
I think the one thing that was missing, and this was pointed out even before the series started by, among others, Hypercourse on Twitter, was that it could have made the narrative easier to draw if there'd been a proper named trophy. Yeah. We weren't even sure until the last couple of games if there was a trophy. And we were just talking about who's won the multi-format series, and that just feels like a bit of a mouthful. Whereas if we'd been able to go, who's won the XY trophy, yeah. That would have made it easier to build that narrative from the media's perspective. And I think that is important, being able to build that narrative. If you think about it, that's why the Women's Ashes exists as a thing, right? Because everyone understood that there needed to be a proper narrative to that contest and a trophy that everyone cared about. And those things exist in men's cricket for different for different series between different countries. Yeah. Like the classic example being the Border Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India men. I think the next time we need to look at actually naming a trophy and having a trophy that's going to be the same trophy given again and again, not some nondescript glass vase that Heather Knight holds up and then gets shoved away somewhere and nobody ever sees again, but an actual trophy that's recognisable, and that the next time someone wants to just win that trophy back, and that particular trophy. I think that's important for the players as well, and for the fans to get a genuine narrative of it. And if they do that, then we could really have something very, very positive going forward between England and India, which is going to become really competitive over time. Right, Raf. Now we got to talk about it. The 100. The 100 begins this week with some games somewhere between some teams. I'm not sure, but Raf, what's it all about?
Well, it's 100 balls. No, I'm not going to go into that. But it's starting at the Oval with the women's match, isn't it? Between the Oval Invincibles and the Manchester Originals.
That is right.
Thank you.
I did actually know, guys.
I feel quite anxious about it, I have to say. I have to be honest about that. And I feel quite anxious about it for a couple of reasons. The first is kind of with my journalist hat on. It's going to be very difficult to cover, I think. I've got into, all journalists have got into the kind of cricket vernacular. You know how to write a match report for a T20 or an ODI or a test. And we know the language that we're meant to use and how we're meant to write it. And the 100 is... it's still cricket, but they've done lots of strange things, like we're not allowed to use overs. I don't have a problem with all of the gender neutral stuff. I mean, batters, I've been using that for a while and that's fine, but I just think it's going to be quite difficult to write about effectively. And I suppose maybe this is what some established journalists felt with the advent of T20 cricket in 2003, whenever it was, and they kind of would have been a little bit unsure about how to go about writing about it. But this is even more of a revolution, really, in the sense of not being able to talk about overs, for example. So that's difficult. I also feel a bit anxious about it because I feel that we're being told by the ECB particularly that if it doesn't succeed, then English cricket is in real difficulty, and that we really need it to succeed, and we should be really willing it on to succeed. Otherwise, that could be kind of the death of our very much beloved sport. I don't know if I totally buy into that, but it does make me feel a bit nervous. It makes me feel like it's quite a high stakes competition. So that's sort of how I'm feeling. How do you feel, Sid?
Honestly, a bit conflicted. I think I've only watched one 100 ball game, but it was fine. It was a game of cricket. It worked. It is a snappier, faster version of cricket. And on those terms alone, it succeeds. It is going to be slightly more appealing to people that are not hardcore fans in that sense, because it's that bit snappier and that bit faster to go through. And the format as a format, it's okay. It works. It's cricket.
Okay.
But the traditionalist in me is still kind of unhappy about swapping overs for fives and ends, and I remain conflicted about that, in that I know that that's like it's stupid in one way, but on the other hand, it's like, well, you attack the traditions of cricket at your peril, really.
Yeah.
And I think that does represent a difficulty. As many people have pointed out, for taking away, if you go and bring in all these new fans, you've still got to then go, well, actually all that 100 ball stuff, all the fives and things, actually they don't count when you come to like ODI cricket and Test cricket. Now you've got to go to these things called overs, and now you've got to relearn what you learned, and I'm not convinced that works. But I am a fuddy-duddy traditionalist about that thing. There are still issues that I have with the competition as well. I still think it was a mistake to create a whole load of new teams in this country. I know that it worked in Australia, but a lot of things work in Australia which don't work here. In Australia, you can go to the beach on Christmas Day. Try going to the beach on Christmas Day here. I can promise you are not going to have fun. So just because additional teams worked in Australia, I don't think that was the right thing to do. And in particular in the women's game, just at the point where you're trying to set up a load of new teams, having already thrown away one lot of teams, and you're trying to set up another lot, albeit some of them, inherited team names and things, then you go, well, actually, there's these other lot of teams as well that you can support. And that's tough for the fans to get their heads around, particularly the younger ones that they're actually trying to attract. Another key aspect of that is moving players around. This, I feel, was a huge, huge mistake, and demonstrated that the people at the ECB didn't really and don't really understand the way fans work. Fans, particularly young fans, the very ones they're trying to attract, the girls aged 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, they attach to players. If you see, the kids around here with football shirts, my parents live just outside the Emirates Stadium, right next to the shop, and you see the kids coming out of the shop with their new Arsenal shirts, and they'll put it on. They're so excited. Mum or dad will take them to the shop. They'll buy the shirt, and then they'll come out and they'll put it on, And it's not an Arsenal shirt they've got, it's a shirt of a particular player, and they'll turn around and they'll have a particular player's name on the back. And it's players that pull in those young people and turn them into the lifelong fans that cricket needs. And to say, well, this person's your player when you're in the Southern Vipers, but when they're not in the Southern Vipers, then they're the Trent Rockets player, and it's just, it makes it really confusing for young fans, that narrative. And I think that was a mistake. And I wish that they'd gone in a different direction. But you know, we are where we are. And at the end of the day, it will still be cricket. Raf, you know, in terms of like the 100 itself, we're told again and again it will be good for women's cricket. Is it going to be good for women's cricket?
I think the jury's out, if I'm honest. I think that there have been some exciting aspects, and they, you know, for example, they bang on about equal prize money. That's great, but obviously your graphic or your infographic that you continually kind of put up on Twitter shows that actually the vast majority of the money overall is still going to the men's salaries, and so you know there are problems with that narrative of it's all about gender equality. I think there are broader problems with that narrative because clearly the whole competition was designed with the men's game in mind. Because we know that, you know, when they were first thinking about this competition, the Kia Super League had only just started, and then became this great success. But at the point where it became this great success, they went, oh no, we've got to abolish it because we want the women's stuff to come in with the men's and be aligned. So they've got rid of something really great in order for something kind of uncertain to come along. And in terms of kind of the actual, you know, that everyone's talking about the fact that the match day experiences are meant to be really equal, that it's going to be kind of this equal platform, the teams are going to be in the same hotels, the men and women are really going to feel like they're the same, they're all going to talk to each other, and they're going to kind of help each other in the nets, and they're going to all cheer each other along on the double headers. Very, very interesting claims being made about equality. I'm interested in what it's actually going to feel like on the match day. So if you're a male player and a female player, does your experience look the same? Does your experience feel the same? If you're going to a women's 100 match or a men's 100 match as a fan, new fan or an established fan of cricket, does your experience feel the same? I don't know if it will. It's what we're being told, but will it? So for me, the jury's out, really. Anyway, we will hopefully be bringing you, well, we will definitely be bringing you some coverage of the 100, but we don't know what that coverage is going to look like, do we, Sid? What's happening with that?
Well, who knows? So we don't know at this stage whether we've been accredited for any matches at all in the 100. We don't know whether we've been accredited for the first match. Officially, you're supposed to receive an email 5 days prior to the match to say if you've been accredited. If you don't receive an email, we've been told that means you're not accredited. We have received no email. No emails have, at this stage, no emails have been received, and therefore we are at war with the ECB.
I think you better edit that bit out.
Really?
No, it's fine.
Okay. We'll leave it in there.
Okay.
We haven't received an email, so we don't know that we're going to be accredited for the first match. We might be watching it on television with you guys. We might not be. We'll see.
Okay. Anyway, it's going to happen, and we'll hopefully go to some of the games. Maybe you will as well. Let us know what you think. As ever, we're interested to hear your thoughts on the 100 and women's cricket. And that's all for this week's episode. See you in a week's time. Bye for now.
Bye.